Good evening. Tonight we drift into the hidden world of ancient Japan, where behind lattice doors and paper walls, the days of women chosen as companions unfolded with quiet rituals and unseen tensions. It was a place of fragrance and silence, where every movement mattered, where the faintest gesture might alter the course of a life. The courtly chambers of Heian, Japan seemed at first like sanctuaries of beauty, yet beneath the polished wood and painted screens, subtler currents moved, shaping destinies in ways that few beyond those walls could ever perceive. There were mornings when the air itself seemed heavy with secrets. In one chamber, a folded fan carried a verse that no one dared read aloud. In another, a porcelain bowl held water so clear that a single drop of ink could reveal an unspoken rivalry. A lacquered comb, laid too near another woman's pillow, might carry meanings far beyond its simple purpose. These were not open confrontations, nor scenes of spectacle, but faint shadows on the fabric of daily life, shadows that lingered longer than spoken words. Yet to step into this world was to be surrounded first by stillness. At dawn, pale light fell through rice paper screens, softening edges and dissolving distance. Outside, a garden stirred, the rustle of bamboo leaves, the faint drip of dew from plum branches, the slow awakening of insects hidden in moss. A servant moved silently, her feet barely brushing the mats, placing a tray of fresh water at the bedside. The fragrance of hinoki would mingled with a thread of incense still burning from the night before, a fragrance chosen not only for its sweetness but for the memory it carried, the subtle suggestion it left behind. The women stirred within this space of muted color and texture. They were wrapped in silken layers, robes dyed in shades to echo the seasons, soft greens for early spring, the pale lavender of wisteria for summer, russet tones for autumn, white edged with faint blue for the breath of winter. Every fold of fabric was deliberate, each layer an unspoken word in a language of appearances. When they moved, the sound was like wind brushing through reeds, delicate, persistent, full of meaning to those who listened closely. Though the palace was vast, the world of these women was contained, measured in corridors, in gardens glimpsed through screens, in hours marked by the sound of bells or the turning of lamps. And within this narrow space, every day unfolded with the same slow rhythm, a rhythm that concealed as much as it revealed. They began with rituals of appearance. Hair was combed into smoothness, long strands flowing dark and heavy, brushed until they gleamed like wet ink. Skin was powdered pale, lips touched with faint vermilion, eyes shaped with the lightest stroke of pigment. These were not vanities but duties, signs of refinement that might secure favor or, if neglected, bring quiet disgrace. The weight of expectation pressed upon them in silence. It was never spoken, but it filled the air like an unseen mist. After these preparations, the hours stretched wide. Some devoted themselves to music, the plucking of the koto, strings humming low and resonant, weaving a sound that seemed to echo the heart's unspoken rhythm. Others lingered with ink and brush, shaping poems that captured fleeting moments. The curve of the moon, the scent of rain, the brief life of blossoms. A few spent hours at their embroidery frames, guiding threads of gold and crimson into images of birds and flowers. Each stitch both delicate art and quiet occupation. But within these gentle pursuits lay sharper edges. A verse too finely written, a note played with too much grace, could draw attention, admiration, perhaps, but also envy. The women learned to measure their talents, to reveal just enough and no more, to balance on the line between notice and danger. Their lives were performances of subtlety, where silence often spoke louder than song. Occasionally, moments broke through the calm, small, almost invisible, yet unforgettable. A letter placed where only one other might find it, a scent carried upon the sleeves of a robe, an ornament shifted from its place. These gestures carried weight, their meanings deciphered only by those attuned to the delicate codes of the court. And though the outer world believed these women idle, they navigated a realm as intricate as any battlefield. though fought with glances and gestures rather than steel. Still, much of the day passed in quiet. They wandered shaded gardens, where carp moved slowly beneath lotus leaves and stepping stones led into spaces of shadow and reflection. They watched the turning of the sky, the drifting of clouds, the fall of light upon painted screens. They listened to the faint drip of water from bronze basins, the whisper of wind moving through reeds, the distant cry of a bird unseen in the trees. Time passed like this without urgency, yet with the weight of inevitability. Evening approached with the slow dimming of lamps. Shadows deepened, colors dissolved into dusk, and the women gathered in chambers lit by the glow of lanterns, their sleeves brushing one another as they moved. Conversations were muted, words chosen carefully, each phrase layered with meanings. Music returned, softer now, strings plucked in tones that seemed to dissolve into the night air. Incense was lit again, its spiral of smoke rising slowly, carrying with it prayers unspoken, longings unvoiced. Night brought stillness, yet it was in these hours that thoughts stirred most sharply. Some lay awake upon their futons, eyes tracing the lattice of the ceiling, listening to the distant rustle of night creatures beyond the walls. They thought of letters unwritten, of glances received, of choices made in silence. For in this world, silence itself was a language, and it was in silence that the deepest currents moved. And so the first day faded as countless others had before. But within its calm exterior, beneath its measured rituals and quiet beauty, the air carried hints of stories yet untold, of rivalries concealed, of affections unspoken, of destinies shaped not by battles or decrees, but by the faintest gestures within these hidden chambers. A week had passed since the quiet stirrings of the moonlit chambers, yet the world within the palace had changed in ways subtle, almost imperceptible. The light that fell through the latticed windows seemed different somehow, cooler, tinged with the faint scent of autumn leaves carried by an early wind. Shadows lay longer along the polished floors, folding themselves gently around the low furniture, the lacquered screens, and the corners where soft mats met the walls. The women of the court moved with familiar grace, though there was a certain measured tension beneath their calm. Their days were still marked by the rhythm of ritual, yet each gesture now bore the weight of something unspoken. A comb laid upon a table might hint at a secret alliance. A brush dipped in ink, forgotten for a moment too long, could reveal a fleeting thought. In this world, the smallest details were magnified, their significance multiplied by the attentiveness of those who lived within the same delicate lattice of observation. Morning came as it always did, though there was a quiet difference in its approach. The air was cooler, the dew heavier on the plum branches outside the chambers, each drop catching the early light and reflecting it in tiny prisms. A servant moved silently along the corridor, carrying a tray of fresh water, a cloth folded with precision. Her footsteps were almost inaudible, yet in the hushed stillness of the palace, they resonated as clearly as distant bells. Inside the rooms, the women began their day with the meticulous care that had been trained into them from youth. They smoothed the folds of their robes, checking the alignment of layers dyed in muted tones of indigo, pale green, and soft vermilion. Each sash was adjusted, every hairpin placed with an exactness that seemed almost ritualistic. These were not acts of vanity, nor merely preparation. They were affirmations of presence, silent declarations of discipline and grace, understood fully by those who shared the same walls. Some devoted themselves to music in the early hours. The koto, with its thin, resonant strings, hummed quietly beneath gentle fingers. Notes lingered in the air, bending and stretching through the open screens into the gardens beyond, where bamboo leaves whispered in reply. The melodies were slow, deliberate, carrying within them fragments of memory, of nights spent under moonlight, of words never spoken, of glances that had lingered too long. The sound was soft, yet it seemed to shape the space itself, giving form to the unseen currents of tension, affection, and rivalry that ran through the court. Others sat before paper and ink, crafting poems in the style of the great masters. Their brushes moved with a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing, capturing the fleeting essence of a petal falling, the tremor of a dragonfly's wing, the stillness of water disturbed only by a single stone. Each verse was a reflection not only of the external world but of internal landscapes, the subtle emotions that could not be named, the thoughts that flickered in the dark corners of the mind. The act of writing was a quiet rebellion, an assertion of self within a system that prized obedience and composure above all else. And yet, even in these hours of calm, the air carried a sense of anticipation. The women were aware, each in her own way, of the delicate balance of favor and disfavor, the unspoken hierarchies that shifted like sand beneath a gentle tide. A fan left on a mat in an unusual position, a robe brushed against another's sleeve, the briefest note of fragrance lingering in the air. All could signal intentions, alliances, or warnings. Observation became as necessary as breathing. Every detail mattered, and every inattention could alter the fragile equilibrium. The gardens outside the chambers offered moments of respite and reflection. Paths wound between carefully pruned trees and stones placed with deliberate care, while streams murmured softly, guiding water over moss-covered rocks. Carp glided beneath the lotus leaves, their scales catching the sun in flashes of gold and crimson. Here, the women could walk slowly, feeling the texture of the earth beneath straw sandals, smelling the faint musk of wet moss and autumn flowers. Conversations were often wordless, expressed through shared glances, gestures, or the simple act of walking side by side. Even silence carried significance, a language as precise and intricate as the inked poetry they practiced within the rooms. Meals followed the morning rituals. Trays were set with small portions of delicately prepared food, rice molded into soft shapes, fish garnished with sprigs of herbs, pickled vegetables arranged with careful symmetry. Eating was a measured activity, not rushed, not loud. Each bite was accompanied by awareness of manners, of posture, of the gaze of others. The flavors were subtle, refined, chosen to please not only the palate, but to reflect the seasons and the aesthetic values of the court. Even the clink of lacquered bowls carried a resonance, part of the unspoken music of daily life. As afternoon approached, some women engaged in embroidery or weaving. Their fingers traced patterns across silk and thread, forming blossoms, cranes, or abstract designs that seemed to capture movement and emotion in delicate lines. These activities required patience and attention, yet they were also opportunities to demonstrate skill and discernment, to reveal competence without arrogance. The resulting textiles were not merely decorative. They were symbols of presence, markers of individuality within the communal life of the palace. Though the days were regimented, moments of unpredictability occurred. A sudden knock at the lattice door, a message delivered by a servant, a note of perfume carried upon the folds of a robe. Each could alter the subtle dynamics of the court. Reactions were never overt. Rather, they unfolded in quiet ways. A lingering glance, a slight adjustment of posture, the deliberate delay of a bow. These tiny shifts were the language of influence, the unspoken measures of power within the confined world they inhabited. Evening brought a gentle lowering of light, the lamps casting a warm, golden glow that softened the edges of the room and muted the colors of the robes. Shadows deepened, folding over one another, and the air became heavier with the mingled scent of incense, wood, and lingering perfume. Music returned, slower now, notes stretching and fading like whispers, carrying with them the weight of the day and the faint ache of emotion that could not be named. In these hours, the women often paused to reflect on the passage of time. Some lay upon their futons, hands folded neatly, eyes tracing the intricate lattice patterns above. Others moved quietly to the screens, watching the moon rise over the gardens, observing the delicate reflection of light upon water. Thoughts drifted across unspoken landscapes, memories of favor and slight, moments of beauty, encounters that had seemed trivial yet had left impressions deeper than any words could capture. The night was a companion in these contemplations, holding space for feelings that could not find expression in the daylight. Through these long hours, the palace remained a world unto itself, a place where minute details could carry immense significance, where gestures and silences were weighed with precision, and where life was conducted within a careful choreography of observation, restraint, and fleeting connection. The women moved within this lattice with an awareness that was both exhausting and necessary, their minds attuned to currents invisible to anyone outside their walls. And yet, amidst the stillness, hints of change drifted through the air. A new presence might arrive, subtle at first, yet altering the patterns of attention. A line of poetry or a melody could shift perceptions, drawing eyes and thoughts in unexpected directions. The palace, though governed by ritual and routine, was never stagnant. Beneath the calm surface, threads of influence, longing, and rivalry wove an intricate tapestry that would continue to unfold with each passing day. Night deepened, and the chambers grew quiet once more. Lamps flickered softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls and floors. The women settled into rest, their bodies wrapped in layers of silk, their minds tracing the delicate patterns of memory and anticipation. Outside, the wind rustled through bamboo and plum, carrying with it whispers of the world beyond. Yet the palace remained a closed universe, a realm of quiet intensity where every small movement mattered. And so the second day, like the first, drew to a close, not with dramatic events or sudden revelations, but with the gentle folding of time, the slow accumulation of impressions, and the persistent hum of awareness that defined life within these walls. In the quiet, one could sense the countless stories yet to unfold, the subtle dramas written in glances, gestures, and the spaces between words. The world of the court continued, intricate and unhurried, inviting those within to observe, to reflect, and to participate in the delicate rhythm of existence. The following morning arrived with a gentle, almost hesitant light. It filtered through paper screens and pale shafts, revealing the subtle textures of the walls, the faint grain of lacquered wood, and the soft weave of mats that lined the floors. The air was crisp, carrying with it the lingering scent of rain that had fallen during the night. Each droplet that clung to the plum blossoms outside seemed to catch and scatter light, creating an array of miniature reflections, as if the garden itself were quietly conspiring to greet the day. The women of the palace stirred with quiet precision. Movements were measured and deliberate, like the brushing of silk against silk, or the gentle rearrangement of a decorative comb. A delicate ritual unfolded in each room. Brushes traced ink across fine paper, sashes were folded and smoothed, hairpins clicked softly into place. Every action, no matter how minor, bore significance. An acknowledgement of order, a demonstration of competence, and a subtle assertion of presence within a world governed by observation and discretion. Some walked to the courtyard, allowing their sandals to touch the cold stones in an almost meditative rhythm. The wind moved through the bamboo, carrying the faint fragrance of fallen leaves, the crisp tang of early autumn. Tiny rustlings suggested the presence of unseen creatures. A bird settling upon a branch, a butterfly resting on a leaf, the soft scuttle of insects across moss. Each sound was noticed, catalogued, and felt. These were not interruptions to their day, but threads woven into the broader tapestry of their existence. Music was performed again, this time in gentle unison. A kodo's resonant tones blended with the muted harmonics of a shakuhachi flute, the sound drifting like fog across open corridors. The melodies were deliberate, unhurried, yet they carried subtle tension, reflecting unspoken thoughts and the weight of small secrets. To hear them was to understand the invisible currents of relationships, favor and jealousy, curiosity and longing, patience and restraint, all encoded in patterns of sound rather than words. In one chamber, embroidery unfolded with meticulous care. Threads of gold and crimson traced intricate floral patterns, each stitch deliberate, every movement a quiet meditation. The hands moved with fluid grace, guided by memory and intention, translating the fleeting impressions of gardens, clouds, or imagined landscapes into silk. These creations were more than mere decoration. They were a record of thought and feeling, a silent assertion of individuality in a life otherwise governed by uniformity and expectation. Meals arrived with careful timing. Small portions were artfully arranged, rice molded into symmetrical forms, pickled vegetables accentuating the colors of seasonal blooms, fish garnished with sprigs of herbs selected for their subtle fragrance. The act of eating was slow, deliberate. Posture, the gentle motion of chopsticks, and the measured pace of tasting were all as important as flavor. Each bite became an exercise in mindfulness, an affirmation of patience, and a small celebration of the aesthetics embedded in everyday life. The afternoon brought an almost imperceptible shift in mood. Servants moved with hushed urgency, their presence sensed more than directly observed. Messages were delivered in folded notes, gestures exchanged with near imperceptible nuance. Every small act could ripple through the intricate social lattice of the palace. A fan left in an unusual place, the scent of incense lingering longer than expected, a robe brushed accidentally against another's sleeve. These minute details were observed with precision. They shaped alliances, whispered warnings, or revealed hidden sympathies. Outside, the gardens offered a sanctuary. Women strolled beneath arching branches, pausing to examine blossoms or listen to the gentle murmur of water flowing over moss-covered stones. Carp glided beneath lotus leaves, their movements slow, measured, hypnotic. The garden was a space of reflection, where silence was meaningful, and shared walks carried conversation in glances, gestures, and fleeting touches. Each sensory detail, texture of bark under fingers, the earthy scent of wet moss, the crisp breeze brushing against skin, was remembered and interpreted within the subtle economy of palace life. As evening approached, the light shifted, softening into amber and gold. Lamps were lit, their flames casting gentle, wavering shadows that played upon walls and screens. Music returned, slower now, more contemplative. Notes lingered, merging with the sense of incense, polished wood, and faint traces of perfume. In this atmosphere, thoughts drifted and mingled with memory. Recollections of brief intimacies, minor rivalries, moments of beauty unnoticed by the untrained eye. The night invited introspection, a quiet acknowledgement of time passing within the confines of an ordered existence. In these hours, the palace seemed both larger and smaller than it appeared by day. Each corridor, chamber, and garden path carried layers of meaning, histories written in subtle gestures and careful observation. The women moved through these spaces with a constant, gentle vigilance, their awareness encompassing the minutiae of daily life, the rhythms of others' habits, and the silent communication of glances, postures, and shared knowledge. Every small decision had weight. Every delay or omission could signal thought, intention, or favor. And yet, even amid the careful order of this world, moments of unanticipated beauty emerged. The reflection of moonlight on water, a particularly rare blossom in full bloom, the unexpected clarity of a musical note. These ephemeral events reminded those present of the depth and unpredictability inherent in a life structured by ritual and attention. Each instance offered a fleeting sense of wonder, a reminder that even in constraint, life could surprise and delight. Night fell fully, and the palace settled into a gentle hush. Lamps flickered, casting long shadows across mats and lacquered surfaces, while the scent of incense lingered like a soft exhalation. Women lay upon futons, hands folded, eyes tracing patterns in the lattice above. Some observed the moonlight filtering through screens, watching the gentle sway of bamboo in its silver illumination. Thoughts drifted over the day. The melodies played, the threads woven, the small victories and quiet negotiations that had passed without notice. Time seemed to slow, compressing and stretching in the dimly lit rooms, where presence and attention were as tangible as the silk beneath fingertips. Within the quiet, the palace breathed. Its walls held countless stories, some whispered and some unspoken, all recorded in gestures, objects, and the subtle architecture of attention. The women, with their practiced grace, continued to navigate this world, each step and glance a note in a complex symphony of awareness, desire, and endurance. The night wrapped around them like a protective veil, a reminder that even in measured, controlled existence, life's subtleties could unfold in the smallest, most revealing details. The late hours deepened the sense of stillness. In one room, a single lamp burned low, its flame reflecting in the polished surface of a small lacquered box. The box held delicate ornaments, combs, pins, and miniature mirrors, each carefully arranged, touched only when needed. Fingers traced these objects with practiced reverence, appreciating both their utility and their artistry. The act of arranging, straightening, or inspecting became a meditation, a gentle assertion of control in a world where every movement carried weight. Elsewhere, a courtyard pool mirrored the darkening sky. Water rippled as a stray breeze moved over the surface, carrying the faint aroma of wet stone and floating petals. A reflection of a paper lantern trembled gently across the water, creating the illusion of movement even where there was stillness. Observing this interplay of light and shadow was both calming and profound, a reminder that even in static moments, the world shifted subtly, constantly shaping perception and thought. Some women turned their attention to quiet study. Scrolls were unfurled, revealing elegant brushwork of poetry, philosophical musings, or botanical illustrations. Inked characters flowed with deliberate artistry, each stroke conveying more than words alone. Fingers hovered over these lines, tracing meaning, contemplating rhythm, and savoring the tactile sensation of smooth paper. In this way, scholarship and craft intertwined seamlessly with everyday life, enriching understanding and offering quiet refuge from the strictures of palace expectation. The sounds of the night were soft but persistent. The distant call of a nightingale punctuated the hush, its song both melancholy and comforting. Occasionally, the scuttle of a small animal among the stones reminded those within that life persisted outside the walls, unconcerned with the rituals indoors. Even these subtle noises carried significance, contributing to the perception of space, marking the passage of hours, and punctuating the delicate rhythm of the palace's nocturnal life. In chambers where incense burned longest, shadows moved like whispers across walls. Every fold of silk, every tilt of a head, and every gentle sigh held meaning. Some gestures were instinctive, others deliberate, forming a quiet language of presence and intention. Observing these motions, one could sense the intricate interplay of favor and avoidance, curiosity and discretion, longing and restraint. The subtle choreography of palace life unfolded without words, each movement observed and noted, each glance a signal in a lattice of relationships both visible and hidden. As the moon climbed higher, its light softened the outlines of objects and figures. Carp in garden ponds seemed to hover like spectral shapes beneath lotus leaves, and the bamboo swayed with an almost ethereal rhythm. The reflections of paper screens, lacquered panels, and polished floors created layers of shadow and light, adding depth to the perception of space and time. Within this interplay, moments of private contemplation occurred, offering solace, reflection, and the quiet thrill of awareness of one's own existence within the vast, ordered world. Even the act of rest carried ritual. Futons were spread with care, pillows arranged to support the body while allowing the mind to wander. The women adjusted blankets and robes, creating spaces of comfort and security. The tactile world was heightened. The smoothness of silk against skin, the faint warmth of a heated lamp, the subtle fragrance of oils and incense. These sensations grounded thought and emotion, guiding attention inward while the palace around them remained a repository of quiet movement, faint sounds, and unseen presences. Sleep arrived slowly, often in stages. First, a gentle relaxation of muscles, a softening of posture, a release of tension carried throughout the day. Then the drift of thought, tracing patterns of events, impressions, and sensations. The shimmer of a hairpin, the brush of a sleeve, the fleeting melody of a coda note. Dreams, when they emerged, were delicate, echoing the ordered yet unpredictable patterns of daily life. They intertwined memory and desire, observation and imagination, blending with the quiet architecture of the night to form a continuum of experience that transcended simple rest. In the deepest hours, the palace itself seemed to breathe, each wall, corridor, and chamber holding the accumulated traces of human presence. The faint impression of steps, whispered motions, and glances lingered as a subtle residue upon surfaces. The garden continued its nocturnal vigil. Leaves quivered in moonlight, water rippled silently, and the faint murmur of insects wove a background of life and continuity. In this quiet, one felt the depth of connection between environment and self, between observation and reflection, between the fleeting and the enduring. Morning approached once more with soft inevitability. A mist hung low in the gardens, obscuring distant bamboo groves and diffusing light into gentle shades of gray and silver. The scent of dew on stone, wet earth, and early blooms permeated the air. Footsteps returned to corridors, paper screens were pushed aside, and the delicate rituals of preparation resumed. The cycle of attention, observation, and reflection recommenced, each action mindful, deliberate, and meaningful, continuing the endless, intricate rhythm that defined palace life. Through all this, the subtle tensions and pleasures of existence within these walls remained. Favor and disfavor, curiosity and reticence, admiration and jealousy, all wove silently through the daily routines. The women navigated this lattice with grace, skill, and constant awareness, their lives composed of innumerable small gestures, attentions, and observances. Time itself seemed measured not in hours or days, but in the cumulative texture of these minute acts, each one a thread in the larger, intricate tapestry of their shared experience. The palace exhaled with the day, and the women moved within it with quiet rhythm. Moments of beauty, fleeting and unexpected, persisted. The play of sunlight across a lacquered surface, the shimmer of a silk sash, the gentle ripple of a pond disturbed by a passing breeze. These instances, delicate and ephemeral, were treasured, observed with care, and incorporated into the silent narrative of existence. By mid-afternoon, the palace had reached a steady equilibrium. Tasks were completed with precision. Small details, adjusted and observed, maintained order. The women's movements were fluid, their attention acute yet calm. Each action, whether sweeping, writing, adjusting a garment, or arranging a floral display, was a meditation and a statement, merging discipline with the subtle acknowledgement of individuality. As evening crept in, shadows lengthened once again. Lamps flickered to life, casting gentle illumination over screens, walls, and corridors. Music returned softly, deliberately. Notes lingered like whispered reflections, creating a soundscape that was both grounding and mysterious. The women, attentive and composed, moved through these sounds as though dancing with invisible threads, their awareness extending beyond the immediate to the subtle interplay of space, sound, and presence. And as night descended fully, the palace settled into a quiet, breathing slumber. Each chamber, corridor, and garden corner held traces of the day's meticulous care, the fleeting impressions of attention and awareness. The women rested within the measured rhythm of existence, surrounded by the textures, scents, and sounds of their carefully observed world. In this calm, the palace itself seemed suspended between moments, timeless yet alive, offering a final, gentle reflection of the beauty, complexity, and subtle intrigue that defined every day within its walls. The day lingered in the inner chambers as sunlight shifted through the narrow openings of shoji screens, painting soft, shifting patterns across the polished wooden floors. The women moved with an unhurried precision, each gesture carrying its own weight, measured against countless repetitions and the quiet expectations of those observing. The scent of incense, mingled with the faint aroma of tatami mats and the lingering fragrance of tea, hovered in the air, both grounding and ethereal. One of the younger women, her hair meticulously arranged with silver pins, carried a lacquered tray across the corridor. The soft weight of porcelain cups and the gentle clinking of utensils echoed faintly in the calm expanse. She paused near a low window to adjust the tray, her hands brushing over the lacquered surface, noting the slight imperfections in the grain beneath her fingers. These small details mattered greatly in a world built upon observation and subtle appreciation. The light caught the faint shimmer of her embroidered robe, illuminating patterns of chrysanthemums and waves that seemed almost alive as they moved with her body. In another chamber, older women engaged in the quiet discipline of calligraphy. Brushes traced deliberate strokes across sheets of paper, each character a study in balance and intention. The soft scratch of bristles against the surface formed a rhythm, punctuated by the occasional exhale of breath, a mindful pause, or the careful rearrangement of inkstones. The work was neither rushed nor perfunctory. It demanded complete presence, a melding of thought, motion, and reflection. The scrolls upon which they wrote would later adorn walls or be folded into personal collections. Yet even their act of creation was as much meditation as it was display. Gardens beyond the inner walls seemed to hold their own quiet life. The bamboo rustled gently, moved by an imperceptible breeze, while koi glided silently beneath the water's surface, disturbing it only in the faintest ripples. Lotus blossoms floated like delicate lanterns, their petals catching the sunlight with a soft luminescence. Occasionally, a dragonfly hovered briefly over the pond, its wings catching light in a prism of colors, before disappearing among the reeds. The women, aware of these subtle movements, adjusted their steps and gazes accordingly, moving in harmony with both natural and human rhythms. Some afternoons were dedicated to music. Small koto strings were plucked with care, producing soft, resonant tones that seemed to float through the corridors and mingle with the quiet sounds of the gardens outside. Others practiced the shakuhachi, its airy timbre flowing like a breath through the chambers, a gentle counterpoint to the physical labor of arranging garments or preparing tea. Each note was measured, deliberate, a reflection of both technical skill and emotional resonance. Music here was never mere entertainment. It was a meditation, a bridge connecting inner sensibility with outward presence. Meals were modest yet meticulous. Rice, fish, pickled vegetables, and seasonal herbs were portioned with care, presented on lacquered trays. The act of eating was deliberate, almost ceremonial, each movement of chopsticks measured against both social expectation and personal mindfulness. Conversation was minimal, a murmur at best, allowing the rhythm of the room, the soft clatter of utensils, and the ambient whispers of wind and water to dominate the sensory experience. The women moved through these routines with a quiet, exacting grace, internalizing the structure of their days in ways almost imperceptible to outsiders. Evening brought subtle shifts. Lamps were lit along corridors, their glow reflecting in the polished surfaces of wood and lacquer, casting delicate shadows that moved with the flicker of flame. Incense burned steadily, its fragrance both familiar and calming, mingling with the cool scent of night air wafting through open windows. The change in light and atmosphere prompted small adjustments. Screens shifted to control shadows, cushions were repositioned, and garments were smoothed. Each act reinforced a sense of presence, awareness, and continuity, preparing both mind and body for the gentle decline of the day. The women's movements, though seemingly quiet and unremarkable, held layers of meaning. A tilt of the head, a careful placement of a hand, the spacing between footsteps, all communicated attentiveness, submission, or subtle assertion. These gestures, so integrated into daily life, became a language of observation, of silent negotiation within the constraints of palace life. The space was both protective and restrictive, offering order and beauty while demanding conformity and vigilance. In moments of solitude, a woman might pause at the edge of a veranda, gazing toward the distant mountains beyond the palace walls. The mist that clung to the valleys and forests below was tinged with the fading hues of sunset, pinks and golds softening into dusky purples and blues. Here, away from immediate observation, the mind wandered along subtle currents. Memories, small hopes, reflections on the day's routines. Even this quiet contemplation, however, was tempered by awareness. The self existed in relation to space, time, and duty. Night deepened, and with it came a hush over the palace. Conversations ceased, only the soft sigh of silk, the distant murmur of water, and the occasional rustle of bamboo leaves remaining. Some women reclined upon futons, folding hands lightly over their chests, eyes tracing patterns in shadows and light. Others continued minor tasks, straightening garments, adjusting hair, or polishing the subtle gleam of lacquered ornaments. Each action was an exercise in patience, in attentiveness, in quiet endurance, a weaving together of personal ritual and communal expectation. Even within this ordered stillness, the palace held traces of its deeper currents. Faint tensions surfaced in the alignment of posture, the speed of certain movements, the avoidance or focus of a gaze. These were subtle, almost imperceptible indicators of favor, caution, or private intention. The women, trained in observation and in the careful calibration of expression, noted these signs with the same quiet attention applied to daily duties. Awareness was continuous, an undercurrent to even the most mundane activities. By the late hours of night, the palace seemed suspended in a gentle stasis. Moonlight traced silvery paths across floors and screens, and the lingering scent of incense provided a quiet tether to waking consciousness. Outside, wind whispered through the gardens, water moved slowly in basins, and the distant call of an owl punctuated the darkness. The women, resting or attending to small tasks, existed within this rhythm, their movements measured, deliberate, harmonious with the flow of time and space. Through these long hours, life unfolded in a subtle interplay of observation, ritual, and reflection. Small gestures, repeated endlessly, became expressions of identity, of position, of engagement with the world around them. Beauty, discipline, and attention coexisted, creating an environment both serene and subtly charged, where the passage of time was measured not by dramatic events, but by the accumulation of quiet, meaningful actions. The palace, in its ordered rhythm, allowed for moments of private awareness, fleeting glimpses of individuality within a collective structure. A hand lingering over a brush, a glance toward a distant hill, the soft sigh of silk, all became part of the layered texture of life, subtle markers of presence and perception. Even as the night deepened and the world outside rested in darkness, these currents persisted, quiet and constant, shaping the inner life of the women and the enduring spirit of the place itself. The morning light arrived in gentle streams, brushing softly against the shoji screens and filling the chambers with a diffused glow. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunbeams, catching the light as though suspended in time. The air was cool yet not sharp, carrying with it the faint aroma of morning dew and the lingering scent of night-blooming jasmine from the gardens beyond. Curtains of thin silk swayed slightly in the breeze, producing a whispering murmur that harmonized with the subdued sounds of waking life. The women began their day with quiet deliberation. Some knelt upon tatami mats, performing stretches that were both subtle and precise, muscles awakening in a rhythm learned over years of practice. Every movement was measured, with a fluidity that suggested both grace and discipline. The folds of their robes shifted seamlessly, the embroidered patterns catching the light and tracing the curves of their bodies as they moved. There was an elegance here that existed not in exhibition but in habitual refinement, a subtle poetry embedded in repetition. In the outer halls, attendants prepared the morning tea. Steam rose from lacquered kettles, curling into shapes that seemed almost alive before dissipating. Hands moved in practiced gestures, wiping surfaces with soft cloths, arranging tea bowls with exact symmetry, and pouring with deliberate care. The women who would later partake in these ceremonies observed quietly, noting the slight variations in aroma and temperature, savoring the ritual as much as the beverage itself. Tea was not simply refreshment. It was a meditation, an exercise in awareness, an opportunity to attune oneself to the smallest details of experience. Beyond the chambers, the palace gardens were awakening. Cherry blossoms, still tinged with the soft pink of early bloom, shimmered under the morning light. Petals occasionally drifted to the ground, carried by the faintest currents of air. The pond mirrored the sky, its surface interrupted only by the occasional ripple of a koi or the soft fall of a petal. Paths of stone and gravel, edged with moss, guided the women's steps, encouraging a rhythm that was deliberate, unhurried, reflective. Even the wind seemed mindful here, brushing with a gentleness that invited observation rather than disruption. Some women practiced musical exercises at this hour, their fingers plucking the koto strings in gentle sequences, producing notes that floated like mist across the open corridors. Others sat with brushes in hand, painting delicate scenes of nature on silk or paper. The sound of bristles against a smooth surface, the occasional shift of posture, and the subtle resonance of music created a layered tapestry of sensory experience. Here, as always, the ordinary became extraordinary through meticulous attention, repetition, and the quiet cultivation of skill. Meals followed a structured rhythm. Rice, steamed to perfect softness, rested alongside small portions of fish and pickled vegetables. Each tray was arranged with care, the placement of bowls and utensils reflecting both aesthetic sensibility and mindful practice. Eating was quiet, deliberate, and in some ways ritualistic. The women moved slowly, appreciating textures, flavors, and the harmony of the arrangement before them. Even these small acts were imbued with a sense of presence, a conscious engagement with life's subtler rhythms. Throughout these routines, the hierarchy of the palace was an ever-present undercurrent. Observing eyes noted the slightest deviation from posture or decorum, and subtle shifts in attention could communicate favor or admonition. The women, attuned to these nuances, carried themselves with careful precision. Every gesture, every glance, and every pause was calibrated, not only for personal discipline but for the intricate social tapestry in which they existed. Awareness was constant, quiet, unspoken, yet pervasive. Afternoons brought moments of introspection. Some women sought solace near the koi pond, letting their gaze follow the fish as they moved gracefully through water, or tracing patterns of light on lily pads. Others wandered through corridors lined with lacquered screens and paintings, absorbing the muted beauty of distant landscapes rendered in ink and wash. These hours offered the opportunity for quiet reflection, a space in which thoughts could drift like leaves upon water, unhurried and contemplative. Tasks continued in tandem with these reflective moments. Garments were mended or adjusted, hair arranged with painstaking attention to every strand, and personal spaces maintained in pristine order. Each act reinforced the rhythm of life, linking physical movement with mental focus, aesthetic sensitivity with practical necessity. Even minor tasks carried significance, serving as a reminder of discipline, presence, and the subtle artistry embedded in daily life. In quieter corners, some women engaged in solitary crafts, weaving, embroidery, or the delicate shaping of small clay figurines. The tactile nature of these activities offered a grounding experience, a bridge between thought and creation. Fingers moved deliberately, tracing familiar patterns, correcting minor imperfections, and coaxing beauty from raw material. These exercises were as much an expression of inner contemplation as they were demonstrations of skill. Evening gradually descended upon the palace. Shadows deepened, folding into corners and extending across floors. Lanterns were lit, their warm glow casting gentle, dancing patterns across walls and screens. The mingling scents of incense, tea, and faint floral notes created a layered, calming atmosphere. Tasks slowed, movements softened, and the day's rhythm transitioned toward rest and reflection. The subtle interplay of light and shadow, fragrance and sound, created a cocooned environment in which the mind could settle, guided by both habit and sensory continuity. In these moments, small rituals persisted. Some women knelt to offer silent prayers or gestures of respect to ancestors or patrons. Others folded garments, arranged personal belongings, or smoothed cushions in preparation for the night. Each movement was deliberate, gentle, and imbued with quiet significance. The repetition of these acts, day after day, formed the backbone of existence, a rhythm that shaped perception, memory, and understanding of self within the palace's intricate social and spatial fabric. Through the night, the palace maintained its serene, watchful presence. Breezes whispered through open corridors, the water in ponds reflected the moon's silver glow, and the faint scent of incense lingered as a thread connecting time and consciousness. The women, resting or attending quietly to final duties, existed within this rhythm, an intricate dance of observation, reflection, and careful attention. Even as darkness deepened, subtle currents persisted. Slight movements, glances, or sounds communicated layers of meaning within the shared spaces. The women's awareness, cultivated through long practice, allowed them to navigate these signals with grace and discretion. Each day, each moment, reinforced a sense of continuity, of harmony, and of a quiet understanding that life within these walls was both disciplined and profoundly textured. Time, in the palace, moved not through dramatic events but through the accumulation of countless small actions, gestures, and observations. The careful orchestration of daily life, its tasks, rituals, and quiet reflections, formed a continuous, meditative flow. In this flow, the women found both structure and subtle freedom, a space to inhabit fully despite constraints, where beauty, attention, and presence intertwined seamlessly with the rhythm of days and nights. The morning unfolded with a hush, the kind that seemed to hold its breath between the gentle stirrings of light and shadow. Sunlight filtered through the paper screens, casting delicate lattices of brightness across the polished floors. The air, still cool from the night, carried faint whispers of incense, a subtle reminder of the quiet rituals that had marked the evening. In these early hours, the palace breathed softly, each chamber exhaling a muted serenity. The women moved with a grace shaped by long familiarity with their surroundings. They traversed corridors lined with lacquered screens, their footsteps absorbed by mats that had been worn smooth over decades of careful use. Fingers brushed against the silk of robes, adjusting folds and hems with a mindfulness that bordered on reverence. Their faces, calm and composed, reflected an inner focus. Eyes followed the rhythm of the day as naturally as the rising sun. Even the smallest gestures, tilting a head, lifting a cup, brushing a stray strand of hair, carried significance, subtle cues in a network of unspoken understanding. In the courtyard, the gardens were alive with the subtle movement of leaves and the occasional flutter of petals drifting down from flowering trees. The koi pond reflected the pale morning sky, disturbed only by the gentle arcs of swimming fish or the light ripple caused by falling blossoms. Some women lingered here, letting their hands trail across the water or tracing the contours of stones worn smooth by time. Silence was not emptiness but a presence in itself, offering space for contemplation, observation, and the slow measurement of moments. Tea ceremonies began in subdued cadence, each movement imbued with ritual precision. Bowls were placed in alignment, steam curling from freshly poured liquid, carrying the faint fragrance of leaves harvested at dawn. Fingers clasped around vessels with care, attentive to temperature, weight, and the subtle fragrance released with each sip. The act of drinking was more than nourishment. It was an exercise in patience, a way to anchor oneself in a transient present. Outside, the distant clatter of gardeners attending stone paths mingled with the soft music of a koto played within a chamber, creating an interwoven tapestry of sound, delicate yet constant. Tasks of maintenance continued with equal deliberation. Robes were aired or folded, hair combed and adorned, personal belongings arranged with exactitude. Every act, though seemingly mundane, carried layers of meaning. Correct placement of objects or precise folding of garments reflected both aesthetic sensibility and the disciplined cultivation of self. The women's awareness remained acute, their gaze noting small imperfections that could affect harmony or suggest disorder. Such attentiveness was a form of respect, both for the space they inhabited and the social structure they navigated. By mid-morning, the palace filled with subtle interactions. Women moved past each other in corridors, their glances and slight inclinations of the head conveying messages understood without words. Some paused near screens to observe others' gestures or posture, noting refinements or lapses with careful discretion. Favor or disapproval was rarely pronounced. It emerged in the quiet assessment of movements, the nuanced adjustment of behavior, the attentive gaze that registered deviation and conformity alike. Social rhythm was maintained not through loud assertion but through silent observation and measured reaction. In quieter chambers, solitary arts continued. Brushes traced delicate landscapes across silk, each stroke deliberate, capturing not only the form of trees, water, and mountains, but the mood that lingered between seasons. Fingers threaded silk through intricate embroidery, leaving trails of color that caught the light in subtle glimmers. The women's practice of craft was interwoven with reflection. Each mark or knot held meaning beyond the surface, echoing hours of meditation, repetition, and internalization of patterns long memorized. Even in stillness, a sense of purpose prevailed. Midday brought a gentle warmth that seeped into the palace, softening the light and casting a calm golden hue across rooms. The scent of flowering trees drifted on currents of air through open screens, mingling with the faint aroma of meals being prepared in distant kitchens. Some women paused to observe these subtle shifts, noting the way sunlight traced shadows across corridors, how leaves cast patterned darkness on mats, or how the wind carried new fragrances that hinted at approaching seasons. These observations were not idle curiosity. They were integral to the awareness that structured life within the palace, connecting inner perception with external reality. Meals at this time were simple, harmonious, and deliberately unhurried. Small portions of rice, pickled vegetables, and fish were arranged with aesthetic consideration, colors and textures balanced for visual pleasure as well as taste. Eating was accompanied by a mindful attention to each bite, the sensation of flavor, and the subtle harmony of composition. Conversation was minimal, punctuated only by essential words, and the atmosphere remained meditative. These moments reinforced a continuity of care, observation, and internal focus, uniting nourishment of body with cultivation of perception and discipline. Afternoons were often dedicated to extended practice or reflection. Music, painting, and calligraphy offered outlets for contemplation, demanding full attention and sustained effort. Koto strings resonated in delicate sequences, voice-like and fluid, complementing brushstrokes that left faint traces of inked mist across paper. Women observed one another's progress with quiet appraisal, learning through imitation and attention to detail rather than direct instruction. This subtle exchange maintained communal discipline while honoring personal mastery, weaving individual skill into the fabric of shared daily rhythm. The palace corridors remained alive with motion, but the pace was measured. Even the most mundane tasks, polishing lacquer, rearranging scrolls, tending small gardens, were undertaken with a sense of ritual. Each movement was deliberate, each placement considered, reinforcing the internalized structure of discipline. The repetition of these acts formed a rhythm that carried from one day into the next, a current beneath which the women's thoughts, awareness, and subtle ambitions could flow. The palace itself seemed to participate, its design fostering attentiveness, reflection, and harmony. As evening approached, the light softened into amber and then muted shades, spilling through lattices and screens in gentle gradients. Lanterns were lit, their glow warm, flickering across walls and floors, creating moving patterns that softened the transition from day to night. Women paused in their tasks, observing the change, adjusting robes, or arranging personal spaces in preparation for rest. These actions were deliberate, marking both the completion of the day and the continuity of habits that framed the women's existence. Night brought a deep, enveloping calm. Corridors, gardens, and chambers settled into muted rhythms, punctuated only by the softest of movements. The faint rustle of silk, the careful placement of cushions, or the distant lap of water against pond edges contributed to a soundscape of quiet, attentive life. Within this framework, the women's reflections continued. Thoughts of the day's routines, observations of subtle social interactions, or the gentle drift of memory and anticipation. Life unfolded not in sudden events, but in the layered, delicate interplay of ritual, presence, and observation. Even within the seeming stillness, the palace was alive with nuance. Shadows lengthened and shifted, reflecting the movements of lanterns and the changing angle of moonlight. Breezes whispered across screens, carrying faint scents from distant gardens. Small actions, adjusting a hairpin, smoothing a robe, tending a personal space, carried significance, reinforcing the structure and aesthetic continuity that defined life within these walls. The women's attention, honed over years, navigated these subtleties, blending individual awareness with the rhythm of communal existence. Throughout the night, the continuity of small gestures and rituals maintained a subtle harmony. Careful movements, precise arrangements, and attentive observation formed a network of order that connected past, present, and anticipated tomorrow. Awareness of subtle shifts, of gentle cues, and of silent communication ensured that the palace remained not only a space of discipline but also of meditative presence. Life unfolded as a layered sequence of attention, action, and reflection, each element reinforcing the others in a seamless rhythm. By the late hours, a profound stillness settled, offering space for the mind to drift and rest. The women, having completed their daily tasks and contemplations, found solace in quiet repose. The interplay of light, shadow, scent, and sound created an environment conducive to reflection and dreams, a gentle folding of time that carried both discipline and subtle liberation. Within these carefully maintained patterns, the palace existed as a space where presence, observation, and beauty coalesced, shaping a life measured not in dramatic events but in the quiet, deliberate cultivation of being. The day began with a muted clarity, the kind of soft light that seemed neither hurried nor insistent. It filtered through the paper screens, settling across the polished floors in delicate patterns, tracing the grains and imperfections of the wood with quiet patience. The palace seemed to inhale with the morning, each chamber releasing the lingering scent of incense from the previous night. Shadows stretched languidly along the walls, moving imperceptibly as the sun ascended. In this gentle illumination, every surface revealed textures and details that had been unnoticed in dimmer hours. The slight wavering of lacquer, the uneven edges of woven mats, the faint sheen of silk robes that had brushed against countless hands. Women moved slowly through corridors, their motions deliberate, almost ceremonial. Each step was measured, the soft thud of soles against tatami blending with the whisper of robes as folds brushed against each other. Fingers adjusted hems, smoothed collars, and traced patterns along embroidered panels with meticulous care. Even the simplest gestures carried resonance. A careful placement of a hairpin or the light brush of a sleeve across a screen reflected years of internalized ritual. Eyes scanned surroundings with attentive awareness, noting minute changes in light, in the alignment of objects, or in the subtleties of another's posture. In the inner gardens, morning mist hovered lightly above the ponds and stones, creating an ethereal veil. Koi swam just beneath the surface, their movements disturbing the reflections of cherry blossoms drifting from overhead branches. A faint rustle of wind through the trees punctuated the delicate murmur of water against stone, and the women walking among the paths absorbed these sounds as part of the day's rhythm. Some paused, tracing the contours of rocks, letting their hands hover just above rippling water, observing how petals floated and spun with each ripple. In these quiet moments, observation became meditation. Awareness of the smallest elements of nature intertwined with self-discipline and reflection. Breakfast was consumed with similar care and quietude. Bowls of rice, small servings of pickled vegetables, and lightly grilled fish were arranged to complement not only taste but color, texture, and balance. The act of eating was extended, deliberate, a slow acknowledgement of nourishment and of the fleeting present. Conversation was minimal, yet meaning lingered in glances exchanged, the inclination of a head, the gentle shift of a body as another reached for a shared object. These small interactions, barely perceptible to an untrained eye, maintained the subtle network of social order, respect, and attention that defined the inner workings of the palace. Tasks for the day were methodically distributed. Some women tended to weaving or embroidery, hands moving with practiced precision, leaving patterns both intricate and deliberate. Each knot, each brushstroke, carried both aesthetic and symbolic weight, a manifestation of care and contemplation. Others maintained the gardens, repositioning stones, clearing debris, or pruning delicate branches, attending to growth with gentle attentiveness. Even maintenance of the palace itself was ritualized. Screens were aligned, floors polished, and personal spaces arranged with unspoken guidelines of propriety and harmony. The physical acts intertwined seamlessly with mental discipline. Repetition reinforced focus, creating a rhythm that extended beyond mere action into the cultivation of self. Mid-morning sunlight shifted, highlighting textures and revealing contrasts. The warmth seeped into chambers, softening edges of screens and illuminating dust motes suspended in the air. Women paused occasionally, observing how light transformed spaces, or how shadows traced irregular patterns along the mats. Each observation informed subsequent movement, where a brush should fall, how a garment should drape, the orientation of objects for maximum aesthetic harmony. Attention to these subtle changes was both training and artistry, a continuous engagement with the environment that shaped awareness as much as skill. Conversations, when they occurred, were limited and precise, yet layered with meaning. Words were measured, tone subdued, gestures controlled. A tilt of the head, the positioning of a hand, the rhythm of a breath, all were channels for communication, as important as speech itself. Social cues were internalized and observed with care, creating a network of quiet understanding. Favors, disapproval, or subtle encouragement were never loud. They emerged in gestures, in arrangement, in the gentle correction of posture or movement. In this way, life within the palace was orchestrated not by direct commands but through the cultivation of perception and response. Afternoons were reserved for individual practice, reflection, and occasional study. Calligraphy demanded complete attention, the brush moving slowly, each stroke deliberate, each pause weighted with intention. Mistakes were noted and corrected. Repetition emphasized mastery over haste. Music provided another avenue for reflection. The soft resonance of koto strings and the delicate rhythm of a hand drum offered a channel for meditation, the vibrations of sound aligning with breath and posture. Women observed each other's work silently, noting subtle improvements, adjustments, and refinements. These shared moments reinforced communal discipline, even in apparent solitude. In quieter chambers, attention turned inward. Journals or scrolls might be consulted, inked landscapes contemplated, or philosophical texts reviewed. Women traced lines with eyes or fingers, reflecting on symbolism and meaning, weaving understanding into perception. Reflection was uninterrupted, time itself seemingly stretching and folding around these practices. Awareness of self, surroundings, and social context became inseparable, each moment a reinforcement of continuity and inner poise. Late afternoon brought subtle changes in light and temperature. Shadows deepened, air cooled, and fragrances from gardens carried further into the palace. Women observed these shifts with gentle attentiveness. The way light shifted across a screen, how a branch cast new patterns upon a floor, the delicate fall of petals in the breeze. Even minor adjustments in posture or placement of objects reflected consideration of these natural transformations. Life was measured not in dramatic events but in the careful, continuous alignment of attention, action, and perception. Tea was often served in these hours, an exercise in both ritual and reflection. Bowls were placed, steam rising, fragrance unfolding gradually, capturing attention in its quiet insistence. Hands held cups with measured care, gestures deliberate, movements constrained by awareness of space and propriety. Drinking became a meditation, a momentary suspension of distraction, an immersion in sensory detail. Even when shared with others, the ritual preserved personal mindfulness, binding collective presence with individual focus. Evening light faded slowly, replaced by the soft glow of lanterns, which cast warm, flickering patterns across walls, screens, and floors. Women adjusted clothing, arranged personal spaces, and tended to small, necessary tasks before nightfall. The gentle illuminations softened shadows and details alike, inviting reflection. Movements became slower, more deliberate. Energy, though quiet, remained attentive. Each act of preparation marked not only the transition to rest but the preservation of daily discipline, a ritual acknowledgement of the continuity of life within these walls. As darkness settled, the palace was suffused with an intimate stillness. Corridors and chambers echoed only faintly with movement. The careful placement of a cushion, the smoothing of a robe, or the gentle brushing of a screen. Even in rest, attention was sustained. The women's awareness extended into the night, attuned to sound, scent, and shadow. Subtle observation maintained a silent rhythm, a lattice of consciousness weaving personal, communal, and environmental awareness into a continuous whole. Within this quietude, internal reflection deepened. Women reviewed the day's moments, noting small refinements in technique, minor shifts in posture, and fleeting interactions that had conveyed meaning without words. Emotional currents, though subdued, were present. Small desires, apprehensions, or contemplations were folded into meditation and practice, tempered by ritual, discipline, and mindfulness. This interplay of feeling and attention reinforced both skill and character, integrating experience into a stable inner framework. Night extended its reach, and the palace became almost entirely still. Sounds were faint. The lap of water in the pond, distant stirrings of lanterns, a leaf falling in a garden. These nuances framed consciousness, guiding reflection and supporting the quiet cultivation of mind and body. Sleep approached not as abrupt cessation but as gentle continuation, an extension of the day's careful attentions into the liminal space between waking and dreaming. The women rested in spaces arranged with deliberate care, aligning body, clothing, and objects to foster both comfort and ritual continuity. Breath synchronized with the rhythm of the palace, subtle movements maintaining attentiveness even in repose. Awareness of light, shadow, scent, and sound persisted, forming a backdrop for introspection and dreaming. In this way, the internal and external worlds remained harmonized, each supporting the other in a cycle of quiet discipline and reflective presence. In the hours before dawn, the palace seemed to sigh with accumulated stillness. Lanterns dimmed, shadows deepened, and the faint chill of early morning settled into corridors and chambers. Time, in its gentle, continuous flow, reinforced the constancy of patterns, rituals, and attentiveness. Within these spaces, life persisted not through dramatic events or loud proclamation, but through the layered accumulation of subtle, deliberate, and mindful acts, each contributing to the enduring rhythm that defined existence within the palace. By the final hours of the night, a profound serenity pervaded all. The interplay of light, shadow, sound, and scent created an environment conducive to deep rest and reflection. Women, enveloped in quietude, drifted in consciousness with awareness maintained but gentle, a suspended attentiveness that bridged sleep and wakefulness. This rhythm of careful observation, ritual, and reflection, cultivated over countless days, carried both the weight of discipline and the delicate freedom of meditative presence. Life unfolded in a continuity of mindful acts, subtle gestures, and enduring patterns, each layer reinforcing the others in an unbroken sequence of experience, perception, and quiet understanding. The morning unfolded without urgency. Light, diffused and gentle, crept through the paper screens, painting long, soft shadows across the wooden floors and tatami mats. Every motion within the palace was deliberate, measured, as though the very air had taught restraint. The women moved with quiet precision, the whisper of silk against skin, the subdued tap of sandals on polished planks, forming a rhythm that belonged neither to them nor to the clock, but to the slow pulse of the estate itself. Some wandered toward the gardens, where mist still clung to the koi pond, softening the reflections of flowering trees. Cherry blossoms drifted downward in silent arcs, spinning in the air before settling upon the water's surface. Each petal was a moment suspended, as if the day itself exhaled slowly, aware of its own passage. The gardens were not merely for observation. They were for meditation, a space in which every leaf, every ripple, every bird call could be noticed and absorbed into the consciousness without judgment. Others remained inside, practicing the disciplined arts of brush and thread. Ink spread upon rice paper with deliberate patience, and the smallest misstroke brought both frustration and reflection. Threads were woven through silk with hands that remembered centuries of tradition. Each stitch, each bend of the fabric, was both labor and quiet ritual. It was an intimate dance between mind and matter, a language written not in words but in the cadence of movement and the weight of attention. Voices were nearly absent. The women communicated through subtle gestures, glances, slight tilts of the head, a quiet folding of hands. The smallest motion could convey respect, caution, or guidance. In these exchanges, the language of the palace was spoken with such delicacy that an untrained observer might perceive only silence, while those who lived within it felt the currents of intention flowing through every glance, every pause. Meals were taken slowly, with care given to texture, color, and fragrance. Each bowl, each morsel carried a kind of reverence. Food was more than nourishment. It was a ritualized act of mindfulness. Eyes followed the movement of chopsticks, the careful lifting of a cup, the arrangement of a leaf or garnish. Every motion reaffirmed the balance between the individual and the community, the personal and the ceremonial, shaping the rhythm of the morning. By mid-morning, the work of the palace resumed in full detail. Women tended to the fabrics, the gardens, the intricate decorations that would later adorn rooms and ceremonial spaces. Every gesture, from the folding of a silk robe to the smoothing of a brushstroke on painted screens, carried a weight of precision. Movements were slow, intentional, yet imbued with a quiet grace, as if speed might unravel the careful weaving of discipline and observation that structured the day. The outer corridors held their own whispers. Bamboo swayed faintly outside, brushing against screens, and the soft tapping of sandals echoed intermittently through the open halls. Light shifted gradually, casting new patterns across the walls, highlighting the subtle colors of lacquered wood and muted pigments of hanging scrolls. In these subtle transitions, the women recognized the passage of time not by clock or alarm, but by the change of light, the growth of shadow, and the gentle variations of sound and scent that marked the shifting hours. Some of the younger attendants were tasked with tending the incense. Thin spirals of smoke rose into the air, winding lazily toward the beams above. The scent was delicate, yet persistent. Sandalwood, clove, and faint traces of jasmine. As it mingled with the morning light, it created an almost tangible atmosphere, layering the rooms with a presence that seemed to slow the pulse, steadying thoughts and motions alike. As the sun climbed higher, the activity of the day gained depth but not urgency. In quiet corners, women practiced the art of folding paper into intricate forms, allowing their hands to memorize the creases and curves, their minds attuned to the perfection of repetition. Others polished wooden surfaces or prepared lacquer for future work, movements precise and reverent, mindful of the history that each object carried. Every task, however small, was imbued with purpose, a continuation of rituals that had shaped the lives of women within these walls for generations. Outside, the gardens whispered with life. A small bird alighted briefly on a branch, shaking out its feathers before leaping again. Leaves rustled in a breeze that had no direction, bending sunlight into fractured patterns upon the stone paths. Water trickled from a small fountain, its sound both constant and ephemeral, drawing attention without insistence. The natural rhythm of the courtyard and garden intertwined with the palace itself, forming a subtle symphony in which every element, human and natural, moved in careful harmony. In one room, a senior attendant adjusted the robes of a younger woman, guiding her hands to fold fabric with deliberate care. Fingers lingered over the texture, smoothing out creases, attending to invisible lines of symmetry. Eyes met briefly, exchanging unspoken encouragement and assessment. This was teaching without instruction, a transfer of skill through touch and observation rather than words. The process was slow, exacting, and in its rhythm, it reflected the broader life of the palace. Patient, attentive, aware of both beauty and responsibility. Midday brought a soft lull. The sun, high and warm, filtered through screens, creating patterns that shifted imperceptibly with the angle of light. The air was fragrant with both food and the lingering incense of the morning. Many women retreated briefly to rest, reclining on mats in small, secluded alcoves, eyes half closed, breathing measured. Even rest was ritualized, a mindful suspension in which the body and mind maintained attentiveness even in repose. Yet, beneath the stillness, there were moments of quiet reflection that carried a subtle tension. Lives lived in such closeness demanded vigilance, awareness of hierarchy, and careful navigation of unspoken rules. The palace was not merely a site of beauty. It was a network of relationships, desires, and subtle power. Each glance or gesture could signal compliance, defiance, or attention, shaping the rhythm of the day as much as any task or ritual. As afternoon approached, women gathered for tea. The preparation was a meticulous performance. Water was heated to a precise temperature, bowls and utensils arranged with deliberate care. The pouring, stirring, and serving followed a sequence learned over years, each action steeped in aesthetic and spiritual significance. Conversation remained minimal, but the act itself fostered a shared focus, an acknowledgement of presence and participation. Every sip, every inhalation of steam, was observed with quiet awareness, reinforcing the bonds of discipline, harmony, and mutual recognition. Outside, shadows grew longer, shifting slowly across the courtyard. The interplay of light and dark seemed to extend the day's contemplative rhythm, offering a gentle reminder that time was both continuous and imperceptible. Women moved through corridors and gardens with steady awareness, letting their steps, gestures, and even silences contribute to the ongoing tapestry of palace life. The late afternoon brought music, not loud or celebratory, but soft tones from flutes and strings, practiced by a few who had been trained since early childhood. Notes lingered, weaving through the corridors and open spaces, complementing the muted colors of the setting sun. The sound was neither commanding nor decorative. It was woven into the day as seamlessly as light, shadow, or the scent of incense, a gentle layer upon which the palace's rhythm rested. By evening, a subdued quiet settled over the estate. Lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow across polished wood and muted screens. Shadows deepened in corners, and reflections in the water of the pond became softer, more abstract. Movements slowed, the careful attention of the day giving way to contemplation, reflection, and preparation for rest. Some women engaged in journaling, tracing characters with delicate brushstrokes, letting ink and thought flow together. Others simply sat, observing the subtle changes in light and air, attuning themselves to the palace's ongoing pulse. Every action, every pause, was part of a continuum, linking present experience to past practices, to inherited rituals, to the quiet persistence of time itself. Night descended gradually. The gardens faded into shadow, the pond reflecting only the faintest light of lanterns. A breeze stirred leaves, carrying the faint aroma of flowers and earth. Within the palace, rooms darkened, sounds diminished, and the meticulous order of the day transitioned into the stillness of night. In these final hours, the women's movements became minimal, almost imperceptible. Their presence was felt rather than heard. The soft exhalation of breath, the careful folding of a robe, the brushing of fingers across a screen. Life in the palace continued, yet in a hushed, meditative mode, as if the entire world had paused to honor the delicate balance between discipline, beauty, and reflection. And as the night deepened, there was a pervasive sense of continuity, of an unbroken rhythm that linked the past, present, and the promise of another day. The palace breathed, the gardens whispered, and the women rested within a carefully woven world of attention, ritual, and serene purpose. The shadows in the inner hall stretched longer, merging with the quiet corners where the women moved with hushed deliberation. Their presence was almost spectral, gliding between low tables and lacquered chests, each step absorbed by the mats beneath. The air carried a muted mixture of incense, polished wood, and the faint scent of early tea leaves steeping in delicate porcelain bowls. Time had a slow, undisturbed rhythm here, measured not by clocks but by the sequence of soft, repeated gestures and the measured rise and fall of breathing. A young attendant lingered near the alcove, tracing her fingers along the embroidered edge of a kimono, her eyes following the intricate patterns as though seeking a story hidden within the threads. The elder women observed her quietly, their faces calm but lined with knowledge of decades spent in the same silent rituals. Each movement, whether folding silk or arranging blossoms in a small vase, was both an act and a meditation, binding them to the quiet permanence of the palace life. Through the latticed windows, the dim light reflected off polished floors, glimmering softly across low, wooden beams. Outside, the garden remained still, its stones and raked gravel catching stray shafts of light that penetrated the dense foliage. Occasionally, the faint sound of wind stirring bamboo reached the hall, a whisper that seemed to echo in the marrow of the old walls. The women paid it little notice. It was as natural as their own steady breathing, the invisible pulse beneath the deliberate movements of their daily tasks. In a secluded corner, a more senior attendant began preparing the small lacquered trays for tea, her hands moving slowly, methodically, dipping the brush into water and tracing patterns that would vanish under the porcelain's sheen. The younger ones watched, absorbing not the techniques themselves but the patience and reverence woven into the motions, the unseen grace that defined their existence. There was a rhythm here that outsiders could neither see nor measure, a cadence older than the palace walls, tied to the seasons, to rituals, to the unspoken hierarchy of those who had spent decades mastering the art of quiet obedience. As the day wore on, shadows shifted imperceptibly across the polished surfaces. The women's faces, lit by intermittent reflections of sunlight, revealed nothing of the thoughts behind their eyes, nothing of longing or ambition. Their world was constrained by expectation and beauty, a harmony of motion and stillness, where even a fleeting glance or a slight tremor of the hand could disturb the delicate equilibrium. Yet within this restraint, subtle variations emerged. A hesitant pause and a bow, a finger lingering on embroidered silk, a sigh almost swallowed before it escaped. These were the whispers of individuality beneath layers of conformity, delicate and fleeting, as if even the palace walls might remember them. In the outer hall, faint music drifted from a distant room. A slow, haunting melody played on koto, its strings vibrating softly in the quiet air. The sound mingled with the scent of flowers and ink, a reminder of worlds beyond the corridors, of artistry and life beyond ritual. Some of the women paused in their work, heads tilting slightly, absorbing the resonance as though it were a rare gift, a fleeting acknowledgement that there were experiences beyond measured grace and patient repetition. Yet their motions resumed, inevitably, inexorably, returning to the choreography of the palace life, where each gesture was both necessity and devotion. The day gradually deepened into evening without any dramatic markers. Light dimmed, shadows blended into one another, and the hall assumed a muted glow under the flickering of oil lamps. Patterns on the tatami and silk became less distinct, blending into gentle washes of color and texture. The women continued, hands never idle, eyes calm but attentive, the ritual of motion carrying them forward in quiet harmony. Each tray arranged, each fold of silk, each brushstroke in preparation for the evening offerings was a testament to their enduring patience, their mastery of both space and time, an intimate understanding of the delicate balance between duty and self-expression. In this gradual descent into twilight, the subtle sounds of breathing, fabric shifting, and distant stringed notes filled the air. The palace exhaled with the women, slow and steady, a rhythm that would continue long after individual footsteps and whispers faded into the dim corridors. Their world, though bound by routine and expectation, contained small, intricate wonders that revealed themselves only to those who moved in its quiet tempo. And as the final traces of light waned, leaving shadows thick but gentle, the women remained, poised in silence, a living tapestry of grace and patience woven into the very walls of the palace. The night settled over the palace like a soft cloak, muffling distant sounds and lending weight to the quiet interiors. Within the inner halls, the women moved with the same deliberate patience, their gestures measured and familiar, as though they were extensions of the rooms themselves. Each step on the polished wood echoed faintly, a reminder of the physical limits of the space. Yet even the echo seemed subdued, swallowed by the rhythm of long-standing ritual. In the smallest of chambers, a young attendant knelt beside an open box of calligraphy brushes. Her hands hovered for a moment above the bristles, reluctant to disturb the perfect order. The scent of ink, sharp yet subdued, rose gently, mingling with the lingering aroma of sandalwood that had been burning since dusk. Outside her window, a faint breeze caused bamboo leaves to tremble, a subtle music that mingled with the muted tones of lacquer and silk. The attendant's fingers brushed the brushes lightly, as if her touch might awaken some secret memory held within the fibers of the bamboo handles. The elder women, seated quietly on mats nearby, observed without speech. Their eyes, attentive yet gentle, did not intrude but seemed to enfold the younger ones in an invisible canopy of guidance. Small movements, adjusting the fold of a sleeve, a nod of acknowledgement, the subtle repositioning of a cushion, formed a language all their own. Here, the act of watching was itself an act of teaching, patience instilled not through command but through the meticulous cadence of example. In the corridors, the faint click of sliding shoji doors marked the passage of time in increments almost imperceptible. Within each room, objects were placed with care, flowers arranged in miniature vases, lacquered trays polished until they reflected the lamp's glow like liquid amber. Nothing was haphazard. Even the smallest imperfection might be corrected, not in haste but in thoughtful repetition, reinforcing the awareness that order and beauty were inseparable in this secluded world. The younger women, still learning the subtle ways of palace life, often found their attention drawn to the smallest details, the alignment of a floor mat, the symmetry of a folded kimono, the soft rustle of silk as it shifted beneath a carefully placed hand. These observations, seemingly trivial, carried lessons far beyond mere appearance. They taught patience, precision, and the quiet pride of accomplishment when a simple act, performed without haste, reached its intended perfection. In a side room, a lacquered writing desk bore faint traces of ink, remnants of messages composed for distant chambers of the palace. One of the attendants traced her fingers over the strokes, reading the lines not aloud but with a private understanding. Words were both presence and absence here, carriers of intention shaped by delicate tools and meticulous hands. The act of writing was slow, each mark deliberate, each brushstroke a meditation, linking mind and body through the rhythm of movement. A faint rustle in the hall signaled another figure approaching, a woman of middling age, her robes simpler than those of the eldest attendants but still carefully maintained. She carried a tray of small porcelain cups, each filled with freshly brewed tea. The aroma, soft and warming, drifted across the room, mingling with incense and polished wood. She moved with careful attention, placing each cup with equal regard, as though the small act of serving might encapsulate the very essence of grace. Time passed, unmarked by grand gestures or sudden change, yet every movement left its imprint. Silk glided across floors, brushes touched paper, trays were lifted and replaced, each action layered upon the next in a silent, ongoing pattern that defined existence within these walls. The women did not need words to communicate. Their shared understanding was built on observation, repetition, and the rhythm of shared duties, a harmony that both constrained and liberated them. The light from the oil lamps dimmed further, casting long shadows that softened the lines of the room and merged objects into gentle washes of color. Shadows crept across silk and wood, the dim glow revealing subtle textures previously unnoticed. The intricate weave of a kimono, the delicate carving of a tray, the fine grain of polished floorboards. The women, attuned to these nuances, moved with an almost imperceptible awareness of how each shadow and reflection might affect their surroundings. Even in near darkness, the rhythm of life continued, undisturbed. From a distant room, faint strings of a koto could be heard, each note drawn out slowly, vibrating in the still air like a reminder of worlds beyond the immediate walls. The music's resonance touched the inner hall, but did not intrude. It lingered as a whisper, harmonizing with the ongoing movements of the attendants, threading through the air like an invisible river connecting present diligence with a broader sense of culture and tradition. The women's motions did not pause, yet their attentiveness to the sound, subtle and unspoken, suggested an appreciation of beauty beyond necessity, an acknowledgement of life beyond structured rituals. Occasionally, a hand would linger on a silk panel, a brushstroke, or a polished surface, a momentary hesitation that spoke of reflection rather than indecision. These slight pauses, barely noticeable to an outsider, were rich with thought, a private engagement with the world around them, a quiet assertion of presence within the carefully ordered life. In these moments, individuality surfaced gently, never loud or disruptive, but present like a soft current beneath the visible pattern of shared practice. In the inner courtyard, lanterns cast warm pools of light over carefully arranged stones and raked gravel. The patterns in the sand mirrored the precision within the palace halls, a reflection of the same discipline applied to every motion, every placement of an object. The wind moved through the trees with a soft rustle, carrying the distant scent of blossoms. Even these small gestures of nature were observed, acknowledged, and quietly incorporated into the ongoing sense of rhythm. Life, both human and natural, intertwined seamlessly in an unbroken continuum. Within the palace, evening gradually deepened into night. The dim glow of lamps was joined by the faint shimmer of moonlight filtering through screens, washing the hall in a serene silver hue. Objects lost sharpness, their edges softened, textures merging into a gentle tapestry of forms and colors. The women continued their work in this quiet luminance, their movements subdued, almost ceremonial, linking each task to a timeless cadence. Silence reigned, punctuated only by the subtle sounds of breath, shifting silk, and distant strings vibrating in resonance with the night. As the hours progressed, the palace seemed to settle around them. Each step, each brushstroke, each careful fold became part of an enduring cycle. The women, though constrained by duty and expectation, carried within themselves a quiet vitality, an understanding that within measured repetition lay a subtle form of freedom. They navigated their days with awareness, patience, and grace, and in so doing, became not merely occupants of the space, but integral threads in the fabric of its enduring life. And so the night deepened, enveloping the palace in calm. The activities of the day now softened into shadows of memory and anticipation. The women, poised in their roles, moved in harmony with time itself, neither hurried nor delayed, a living testament to the slow, deliberate beauty of their world. The rhythm of palace life continued, unbroken, an intricate and delicate dance between restraint and expression, a quiet song of enduring patience that would carry them forward until the first whispers of morning light crept once more through the screens. The first hours of the night had settled fully, and the inner palace remained in hushed observance of its own rhythms. Each hall and chamber bore the weight of centuries of repetition, the patterns of life quietly inscribed into the walls, the floors, the very air itself. The attendants, ever aware of the subtleties of their environment, moved with the same gentle deliberation, their motions forming a continuum, a tapestry of practiced grace that left no mark of haste or disturbance. In a small chamber tucked between the larger halls, a young woman arranged a series of small porcelain dishes, each containing a different dried herb or flower. She inhaled their subtle fragrances with a care born of habit, noting the faint differences between blossoms, the slight variations in color, the textures that revealed themselves only to patient touch. Each placement of a dish was deliberate, measured, aligning with the delicate balance of the room itself. The shadows cast by the single oil lamp shifted as she moved, a dance of light and dark that seemed to acknowledge the precision of her hand. Nearby, an elder attendant tended to a low brazier, coaxing the embers into a gentle glow that warmed the space without disturbing the quietude. The faint smoke mingled with the lingering scent of incense, curling in delicate streams toward the papered ceiling. She worked with movements honed over decades, each gesture precise, almost imperceptible, yet perfectly sufficient. The act of tending fire, simple in its essence, became a meditation, a quiet communion with the elemental presence of heat, light, and air. In another corner, a scroll was unfurled, revealing painted landscapes of distant mountains and rivers. The young women gathered, kneeling respectfully, their eyes tracing the strokes of brush and ink, each line a quiet story in itself. The images depicted serene valleys and flowering groves, distant temples perched upon cliffs, solitary figures moving along winding paths. Though they were representations on paper, they carried with them the weight of observation and reflection, teaching patience and appreciation for the subtlety of nature, for the quiet truths that emerge only through careful study. A low murmur of movement sounded in the outer halls as attendants carried trays of tea to awaiting chambers. The cups were placed with deliberate care, the warm liquid filling the rooms with its soft, sweet aroma. The women did not rush, and no words were exchanged. The act of service was its own language, a ritual imbued with respect and attentiveness. Each gesture was measured, as though the careful placement of a single cup could balance the delicate equilibrium of the entire palace. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of cherry trees, the petals faintly brushing against the screens. The attendants paused briefly, sensing the quiet intrusion of nature into the cultivated calm. They did not step outside, yet their awareness of the world beyond the walls became another layer in the fabric of their consciousness. The palace existed not in isolation but in subtle dialogue with the elements. The breeze, the shifting shadows, the scent of blooms drifting on night air. Within the chambers, the women practiced their arts. Calligraphy, weaving, arranging flowers in miniature ikebana compositions. Each activity demanded attentiveness, yet none imposed urgency. Hands moved in unhurried sequences, eyes followed the rhythm of each motion, and minds remained present, unburdened by expectation or haste. There was a harmony here, a quiet interdependence between effort and stillness, a recognition that mastery resided not in grand gestures, but in the meticulous, persistent refinement of small acts. In one corner, a young apprentice traced the folds of a silk kimono with her fingers, noting the subtle variations in texture and color. She adjusted the garment with care, learning from the elder women who observed without intrusion. Each correction, each gentle guidance, reinforced a quiet pedagogy, a passing of knowledge that relied upon observation, reflection, and repetition. The lesson was not in words but in presence, an unspoken understanding that patience and diligence yielded their own reward. The faint resonance of distant koto strings drifted through the halls, a reminder of the world beyond immediate duty. The music was slow, deliberate, echoing against the polished floors and lacquered panels. It was not performed for spectacle, but as a natural accompaniment to the measured life within these walls. The notes touched each listener softly, inviting attention without demanding it, harmonizing with the ongoing rhythms of labor and reflection. The attendants moved seamlessly through these intertwined practices, the physical and the contemplative woven together. One adjusted a tray, another smoothed a silk cushion, a third traced the delicate grains of a polished wood surface. Each action, though small and nearly imperceptible, contributed to the larger pattern of existence. Nothing was hurried, nothing was omitted. The flow of time was mirrored in the flow of movement, each linked to the other in an unbroken chain of presence and attentiveness. In the dim corners of the palace, shadows lengthened, blending the lines between floor, wall, and object. The women moved within these shifting spaces with instinctive awareness, each step measured, each hand guided by memory as much as intention. Even the simplest gestures, lifting a cup, smoothing a silk fold, turning a brush, resonated with an unspoken discipline, a continuity of practice that extended backward into history and forward into the uncharted hours of the night. The faint glow of moonlight, filtered through papered screens, added a spectral quality to the chambers. Textures softened, details merged, and yet the women's attentiveness did not waver. They adapted to subtle changes in illumination as naturally as breathing, their awareness encompassing both the seen and the unseen, the immediate and the distant. The palace, with all its shadows and light, became a living continuum, shaped by the careful motions of its inhabitants, each act reinforcing the delicate balance between stillness and motion, attention and reflection. Outside, the gardens lay in muted silence, their carefully raked gravel and stone arrangements catching the occasional shimmer of moonlight. The attendants sensed the subtle connections between these spaces and their own chambers, the rhythms of nature mirrored in human action, the patterns of leaves and petals reflected in folded silk and arranged flowers. The quietude of the gardens was part of the larger tapestry, a reminder that life was continuous, cyclical, and inherently interconnected. Through the long night, the palace existed as a world unto itself, a microcosm of discipline and grace. The women, though confined to particular spaces and roles, inhabited a realm where attention, patience, and meticulous care elevated the simplest acts into expressions of artistry. Each movement, each gesture, each pause contributed to a broader understanding of existence within these walls, teaching subtle lessons in presence, endurance, and the quiet beauty of measured living. The hours passed with a calm consistency, the attendants immersed in their patterns of work and observation. The palace, though enclosed, resonated with the layered hum of life, the faint scent of incense, the delicate strains of music, the soft patter of silk on polished floors. Time unfolded without fanfare or haste, marked not by external events but by the intricate choreography of everyday acts, each aligned with the shared understanding that linked past, present, and future. As the night deepened further, a sense of completion settled over the chambers. Tasks concluded, arrangements finalized, and the women, attentive yet unhurried, allowed themselves a rare pause. The silence that enveloped them was profound, a living presence, imbued with memory and anticipation. Even in stillness, there was movement, an invisible current connecting the attendants to one another, to the palace, and to the world beyond, a continuous thread of awareness, care, and quiet reverence. And so, as the first subtle hints of dawn began to touch the edges of the palace screens, the women remained poised within their rhythm, the world around them waiting, patient and enduring. Their motions, careful and deliberate, had become both ritual and refuge, a testament to the enduring power of attentiveness, grace, and the slow, measured unfolding of life within the sheltered walls of their secluded world. The first light of dawn began to seep into the outer halls, soft and diffused, yet it carried a presence that transformed the rooms from shadows into space. The attendants had already been awake for some time, moving quietly as though the world itself demanded restraint. Each footfall was considered, each gesture measured, the continuity of night's careful rhythm extending into the morning hours. In a secluded corner of the palace, an elder instructed a small group of apprentices in the precise art of incense blending. The young women leaned forward, eyes intent, as she described the properties of each herb, flower, and resin. She did not speak loudly. There was no need. Her words were deliberate, carrying weight through clarity and precision. Each ingredient was handled with care, its placement in the mixture deliberate, informed by years of accumulated knowledge. The apprentices mirrored her actions, hands moving slowly, absorbing not just technique but a sense of reverence. Meanwhile, in another chamber, a young woman unfolded a scroll depicting a mountainous landscape. Her fingers traced the gentle curves of painted rivers, the jagged outlines of distant cliffs. She compared her brushwork to that of the original, learning the subtle differences in pressure and angle. Every stroke carried significance, every movement an expression of patience. The act of painting was not merely for display but a method of internal discipline, a way to attune the mind and body to the quiet rhythm of existence. Tea preparation began simultaneously in multiple rooms. Water was heated over carefully tended fires, the steam rising in soft plumes that carried the scent of dried leaves and fragrant blossoms. Each cup poured was precise, each placement of a dish and spoon deliberate. The women served not to announce their service, but to honor the ritual itself. Every detail, from the angle of a teacup to the spacing between trays, reflected centuries of practice. A choreography that turned even the smallest acts into subtle art. In the halls, the sound of distant koto strings continued, slow and deliberate, intertwining with the soft scrape of wood against papered floors. The music was unobtrusive, yet it penetrated the consciousness of each woman, reinforcing a sense of calm and attentiveness. The notes lingered like a quiet echo, marking the passage of time not by external events but by their gentle cadence. Attentive ears and patient hearts became attuned to these rhythms, learning to anticipate, to harmonize with the subtle currents of sound. Outside, the gardens were bathed in the pale morning light. The petals of cherry blossoms glimmered with dew, each drop a tiny prism reflecting the fragile beauty of the world. Attendants paused momentarily, sensing the delicate intrusion of nature into their ordered routines. Though they did not step into the gardens, the awareness of these living elements was woven into every gesture and thought. The palace and the natural world existed in a quiet dialogue, each movement within the walls echoing the patterns of wind, rain, and light beyond. The day progressed with meticulous care. Apprentices practiced weaving, folding fabrics with precise alignment, creating patterns that mirrored the subtle intricacies of the natural world. Calligraphy exercises continued, each character an embodiment of balance and rhythm. Even the act of arranging flowers demanded full attention, a quiet meditation in the interplay of color, form, and space. Every motion, though subtle, reinforced a shared understanding that perfection resided not in grand gestures, but in the precise execution of small, deliberate actions. Meals were prepared and consumed with equal care. Ingredients were selected for their season, their fragrance, and their texture. Every piece was placed to balance visual harmony with culinary satisfaction. The women ate slowly, silently, attuned to the tactile and sensory qualities of each bite. There was no hurry. The act of nourishment itself became an exercise in mindfulness, a continuation of the attentiveness that structured every other activity within the palace. In quieter chambers, some women engaged in study. Ancient texts, calligraphic manuals, and philosophical treatises were read and discussed, not in voices raised but in thoughtful whispers or in the unspoken comprehension of shared understanding. Ideas were absorbed slowly, allowed to permeate consciousness without rush. The teachings emphasized observation, patience, and reflection, guiding the mind toward clarity and the recognition of subtle patterns that governed both human and natural behavior. Occasionally, an elder would pass through the halls, observing without intrusion. Her eyes noted the alignment of trays, the precision of folds, the care in brush strokes. Corrections were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly effective. The lessons were not shouted or demanded. They were embedded in observation, demonstration, and the quiet transmission of knowledge. The younger women absorbed these cues with growing awareness, integrating them into their own practice until each act became instinctive, natural, yet consciously attentive. The interplay of light, movement, and sound continued to define the day. Shadows shifted with the rising sun, altering the perception of space, while the soft resonance of music punctuated the gentle sounds of human activity. The palace existed as a living organism, its rhythms dictated by attentive, deliberate action rather than external chaos. Each chamber, each corridor, each courtyard became a node in an intricate web of order and harmony, maintained through years of practice, discipline, and mindfulness. As the morning waned, the women engaged in collaborative tasks, each action harmonizing with another. Trays were carried in synchrony, textiles folded in tandem, water poured with mirrored precision. There was an unspoken choreography, a delicate balance of independent action and collective awareness. Every motion reinforced the continuity of the palace's rhythm, demonstrating how attentiveness and care could shape an entire environment into a cohesive, enduring presence. Throughout the day, moments of quiet observation persisted. Windows framed glimpses of gardens, distant mountains, and the changing sky. Each glance offered subtle lessons in perception, in the appreciation of impermanence, and in the understanding that beauty often resides in small, fleeting details. The women's training reinforced this perspective, encouraging mindfulness in every gesture and thought. Evening approached with gentle inevitability. The light softened, elongating shadows across the polished floors. Fires were tended, incense burned, and the hum of preparation for night returned. The attendants did not hurry. Their movements were deliberate, fluid, and intertwined with the lingering resonance of the day's lessons. Every action, from tending embers to arranging cushions, reflected the ongoing cultivation of awareness, patience, and harmony. As twilight deepened, the palace seemed to breathe as one organism. Sounds and movements merged into a continuous flow, each gesture reinforcing the quiet order that sustained the lives within its walls. The women moved through their responsibilities with grace, attentiveness, and precision, their actions forming an intricate lattice of practice and presence. Every detail mattered, every small act contributed to the enduring rhythm that defined the palace's existence. The day concluded not with fanfare but with subtle acknowledgement of completion. Tasks were finished, chambers restored, and the women paused to observe the equilibrium of their surroundings. Silence, imbued with awareness, settled over the palace, a tangible presence linking past, present, and future. The continuous cycle of activity and reflection, attention and stillness, created a space where life unfolded deliberately, harmoniously, and with profound grace. And as the first hints of night returned, merging seamlessly with the final light of day, the palace remained a sanctuary of measured existence. The women, attentive and poised, continued their rituals, each act a meditation, each gesture a lesson in patience and discipline. Within these walls, life flowed slowly, harmoniously, and eternally, a testament to the enduring power of focus, grace, and mindful presence. The corridors of the palace, long filled with quiet anticipation and the soft echoes of footfalls, had settled into a profound calm. Light slanted through the papered windows, diffused and gentle, touching the floors with the faint gold of late afternoon. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sunlight, drifting in patterns that seemed to linger longer than the moment warranted. Each room, each hall, carried its own memory, the faint scent of incense that never entirely faded, the subtle impressions of silk cushions and polished wood, the quiet residual warmth where bodies had passed or rested. It was as though the palace itself exhaled a slow, deliberate breath, letting the day dissolve gently into the evening. In the inner chambers, the women moved with a rhythm honed by years of habit. Fingers smoothed fabric, arranged trays of delicate sweets, and repositioned small flower vases with careful, unhurried gestures. Their movements were soft, yet deliberate, as if each motion contained a silent acknowledgement of countless days lived in this quiet continuity. No words were spoken. There was no need. The air held a kind of collective understanding, a communion of subtle glances, minute tilts of the head, and shared breathing in spaces that were neither fully public nor entirely private. The atmosphere was thick with a slow, reflective serenity, each woman aware of her own place within the gentle hierarchy of the household, and yet free from any immediate urgency. Outside, the garden mirrored this subdued cadence. Bamboo leaves swayed with a tender, almost invisible breeze, brushing against one another in a whispering chorus. Cherry trees, their blossoms beginning to fade into the soft brown of early autumn, shed petals that landed in delicate heaps upon the mossy paths. The pond reflected the sky's gradual descent from pale blue to the muted amber of dusk, rippling faintly as a small wind kissed its surface. Even the koi, usually vibrant with movement, lingered near the edges, gliding slowly as though the world itself had chosen to pause in homage to the quiet unfolding of hours. In these final days of the season, there was a gentle acknowledgement of cycles. Life, labor, and the inevitable stillness that awaited all. The older women of the household, who had long taught younger ones the subtleties of dress, posture, and grace, now found themselves lingering in doorways or near the low windows, their eyes tracing patterns in the garden or across the polished floors. Their hands, once deft and certain, moved with a slower, more reflective precision, each task now imbued with a consciousness of passing time. There was a quiet pride in the continuation of the household's rituals, yet it was tempered with a soft melancholy, a knowledge that all things eventually settle, fold, and fade. Within the central hall, the delicate scent of incense mingled with the subtle aroma of steamed rice and tea. Trays of food, prepared with the same attentive care as every day, rested quietly, untouched for now, while the women paused in their movements to let the room itself speak. Shadows lengthened across lacquered screens, shifting imperceptibly as the sun dipped lower. The sounds of the outside world, a distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves, seemed to echo within, each note stretching to fill the silence that had gradually claimed the space. Every small detail seemed magnified in this gentle slowing of time. The texture of wood under fingertips, the faint shimmer of polished bronze and lacquered surfaces, the delicate folds of silk that caught the light just so. All these were reminders of a life lived with patience, attentiveness, and a quiet reverence for the smallest elements of existence. Here, in the almost imperceptible transitions from one hour to the next, the women found both their identity and their peace, their daily actions becoming meditative expressions of continuity, care, and presence. The younger women, less practiced but equally attentive, mirrored these motions with the careful diligence of apprentices. They observed and learned, tracing the patterns of older hands, noting the subtle inclinations of posture, the gentle shift of weight that carried grace without effort. In this unhurried space, knowledge was passed not through words, but through the quiet, repeated gestures that had always defined the rhythm of palace life. There was a sense of transmission, not just of skill, but of temperament, of patience, of an understanding of time itself as something to be navigated with calm attention rather than hurried intent. As dusk deepened into early evening, the soft glow of lanterns began to suffuse the halls. Their flames flickered with a gentle persistence, casting moving shadows that seemed almost to breathe alongside the women. Each chamber, each corner, was touched by this golden light, revealing details that might otherwise have remained unseen. The delicate embroidery of robes, the faint scratches of long-used wooden floors, the quiet wear of furniture that had been both tools and companions for generations. In these observations, there was no urgency, only the deep comfort of awareness, of noticing the subtle textures of life as it winds down toward night. The palace, the garden, the women themselves, all existed in a slow, interwoven cadence. Time no longer felt measured by tasks completed or days passed. Instead, it seemed to flow as a gentle current, carrying the small moments of attention, care, and reflection together in a seamless stream. Even the faint noises beyond the walls, the distant rolling of a cart, the whisper of wind over roof tiles, the occasional call of a far-off bird, were absorbed into this rhythm, becoming part of a serene, encompassing presence that held everything in quiet suspension. The evening deepened, and with it came a subtle hush, a settling of all sounds into a softer register. The lanterns flickered more gently, their glow reflecting faintly on the polished wooden floors, bringing out the warm tones of aged timber. The women moved even more slowly now, aware that each gesture might be among the last in the day's quiet choreography. Their hands lingered over objects, the smooth curve of a porcelain teacup, the delicate threads of a folded robe, the worn edges of a wooden chest, allowing themselves the rare indulgence of noticing small imperfections, the marks of use that spoke of past care and labor. In the garden, shadows lengthened further, merging with the darkening air until the bamboo stalks appeared as silhouettes against the deepening twilight. Petals, having drifted through the day, now settled quietly upon the moss and stone, a gentle reminder of the impermanence that governed all life within these walls. The koi had found their nighttime refuge near the pond's deepest corners, their occasional glimmers beneath the water's surface reflecting the last vestiges of fading light. A soft wind stirred, carrying with it the subtle fragrance of damp earth and fallen leaves, threading its way through open doors and across the floorboards, mingling with the lingering scent of incense and tea. Inside, the older women lingered near the low windows, their eyes tracing the patterns of evening light on the garden paths. Their breathing was slow and even, synchronized with the gentle rhythm of the household. They had long learned to find contentment in repetition, to let the flow of daily life move with neither haste nor complaint. Now, in the waning hours of the day, they allowed themselves a quiet reflection, a soft acknowledgement of the years spent in patient care and attention, the countless small actions that had built the invisible architecture of their world. The younger women, likewise, felt the weight of time in a different, gentler way. The lessons they had absorbed, the slow, meticulous folding of silk, the careful arrangement of flowers, the subtle attentions to light and shadow, had become instinctive. Yet, in the dimming light, these gestures seemed to take on an almost sacred significance, a final act of devotion to the rhythm that had defined their lives. In each measured movement, each lingering glance, there was an unspoken connection to all who had come before, a continuity that transcended the passing of days and seasons. Even as night claimed the palace more fully, the sense of presence remained tangible. The walls, though still and silent, seemed infused with memory. The quiet laughter of long-past conversations, the faint echo of footsteps on polished floors, the whispered reverence of hands gliding over fabric and wood. Each shadow, each faint glimmer of light, carried the essence of these moments, suspended in the quiet like a delicate tapestry woven of both time and intention. The women eventually gathered in the central hall, their forms outlined against the warm glow of lanterns. They moved with an unhurried grace, arranging themselves in positions that had become familiar over years of practice. The act of sitting together, sharing the stillness without speech, created a profound intimacy, a bond forged not by words but by the shared experience of life within the palace. The silence was complete, yet it was filled with understanding, each presence acknowledged in a way that required no gesture, no eye contact beyond the soft awareness of mutual companionship. Outside, the night deepened, and the moon rose slowly above the horizon, casting pale silver light over the garden. The water of the pond shimmered faintly in this glow, reflecting the delicate silhouettes of branches and leaves. A few petals, carried by an invisible current, drifted across the surface, settling with a soft ripple. The air was cool and still, and in this perfect quiet, the boundaries between day and night, work and rest, presence and memory, seemed to blur. The household existed now not as a collection of individuals, but as a single living rhythm, a delicate pulse of attention, care, and endurance. As the hours progressed, the women retreated to their private chambers one by one, the lantern light dimming gradually with each departure. Each room, left empty, held traces of movement. A slight crease in a cushion, a faint indentation in the floor where a foot had rested, a lingering fragrance of tea or flowers. Even these residual marks carried the sense of continuity, of a life observed and lived with care. The palace itself seemed to exhale, settling into a night of quiet repose, every surface, every shadow, every echo attuned to the deep serenity that had been nurtured throughout the day. In the final moments of night, there was a sense of completion, a gentle acknowledgement of cycles fulfilled, of tasks concluded, of time observed with reverence. The world outside continued, indifferent to the small rhythms within, yet here, within these walls, the passage of hours had been honored with deliberate care. Each day's labor transformed into a meditation on patience, grace, and awareness. Even as the palace rested, the memory of life within it lingered, as tangible as the shadows and light that had filled the space for centuries. The story of these women, their days measured in subtle gestures and quiet devotion, reached its natural conclusion not with fanfare, but with the gentle affirmation of existence itself. In this slow, deliberate life, every moment held significance, every action carried meaning, and every shadow was infused with the weight of memory and the quiet beauty of continuity. As dawn would eventually return, bringing with it a new cycle of light and shadow, the echoes of these lives would remain, a silent testament to the patient endurance, the gentle artistry, and the tranquil dignity of those who had walked these halls before. And so the palace, the garden, and the women themselves rested, enveloped in the profound quiet of completion, the world outside flowing onward while within, time had found its perfect, serene closure.